Rome stood at the height of its power, yet beneath the grandeur of marble temples and bustling forums, uncertainty gnawed at the foundations of the Republic. Victory abroad had expanded the empire's wealth, territory, and prestige, but success came at a price. Generals returned from foreign wars with legions that were more loyal to them than to the Senate, while politicians in the capital jostled for dominance in a system already straining under corruption and ambition. The ordinary citizens, once proud of their republic, had grown weary of endless conflict and the widening gulf between the ruling elite and the masses. It was in this fragile moment that a letter began to circulate, an unassuming piece of parchment whose words would weigh heavier than the sword, and whose secrets could shift the balance of power in the eternal city. The story of Rome was always one of contrasts. Its people lived under laws that promised liberty, yet those same laws were bent or broken by those with enough wealth to manipulate them. Senators debated in public, but in private they schemed and plotted. To understand why a single hidden message could matter so much, we must enter into this world where whispers mattered as much as armies. The Roman Senate was not merely a council of wise men, it was a battlefield of ideas, egos, and ambitions. Every decision, from the distribution of grain to the declaration of war, was a chance for one man to rise and another to fall. In such an atmosphere, the discovery of a letter claiming knowledge of treachery was enough to chill the blood and quicken the heartbeats of those who read it. Life in Rome was dominated by spectacle and rumor alike. Citizens flocked to amphitheaters to see gladiators fight, but in the streets and taverns, they whispered of conspiracies and corruption. At night, the city buzzed with gossip: who was plotting against whom, which general dreamed of a crown, which senator was secretly accepting bribes from foreign kings. The letter entered this world like a spark into dry tinder. To those who first glimpsed it, it was not just words on paper, it was a revelation, a warning that betrayal was already underway, and that those who ignored it risked Rome itself falling to ruin. The identity of the writer was unclear, the motives hidden, but the effect was immediate. It spread unease and suspicion like a shadow across the heart of the Republic. Imagine, then, the moment when such a letter was unsealed. A hand trembles slightly as eyes scan the inked lines, each sentence dripping with urgency. The recipient knows that sharing this knowledge could mean saving lives, or destroying reputations. In the Senate, where rivals sat side by side in marble halls, one whispered word of conspiracy could unleash chaos. Outside, in the camps of the legions, soldiers already restless with loyalty to their commanders might take one message as a call to arms. Rome's leaders had seen plenty of battles fought with swords, but a battle fought with words was far more dangerous. Unlike a clash on the battlefield, where victory or defeat was visible, a letter worked in silence, eroding trust, planting seeds of paranoia, and drawing suspicion upon even the most loyal of allies. This was the world into which the hidden letter was born, a Rome glittering on the surface but rotting underneath, where triumph and tragedy were inseparably linked. For some, the letter was an opportunity, a chance to seize the moral high ground, to unmask enemies and claim glory as a defender of the Republic. For others, it was a threat, a reminder that their ambitions could be exposed at any moment. The city itself seemed to hold its breath, as if sensing that history was about to be rewritten not by a conquering general but by a secret too dangerous to ignore. Whether its words were true or false, forged or genuine, mattered less than the fact that people believed them. And in Rome, belief could be as powerful as any army. The tension in Rome deepened as the letter began to circulate among a select few, each recipient interpreting its contents through the lens of their own fears and ambitions. To some senators, it was a clear warning of treachery, a sign that their opponents were plotting to overthrow the Republic in secret. To others, it was nothing more than a weapon, a tool to be twisted and wielded against rivals in the endless struggle for dominance. What no one could deny, however, was that its timing was dangerous. The Republic was already a tinderbox, and this letter was the spark that threatened to set it ablaze. Its words were ambiguous enough to sow doubt, yet specific enough to point fingers, and in a city where reputation was life itself, even a hint of betrayal could ruin men overnight. The Senate chamber became a theater of suspicion. Men who once exchanged pleasantries now eyed each other with caution, weighing whether their neighbor's smile concealed hidden treason. Whispers of conspiracy began to ripple through the marble halls. One senator would lean toward another, murmuring that the accused could not be trusted. Another would rise in debate, demanding swift action to preserve Rome's safety. No one wanted to appear complacent, for fear that inaction would be read as complicity. The letter, in its secrecy and mystery, forced every man to take a side, whether he believed in its contents or not. It was no longer about truth, but about perception. In the Republic, perception was everything. Outside the Senate, the atmosphere was equally tense. Roman citizens heard rumors that their leaders were sitting on evidence of betrayal. Merchants and laborers speculated in the forum, their conversations echoing with fear that powerful men were plotting to seize control, or that Rome itself stood on the edge of chaos. In taverns and crowded streets, ordinary voices repeated fragments of what they thought the letter contained, each retelling shaping a more dangerous version than the last. It was impossible to know who started these whispers, but once they spread, they could not be silenced. Rome, which prided itself on order and discipline, suddenly felt as unstable as shifting sand. The generals and commanders stationed beyond the city walls felt the letter's tremors as well. Soldiers who were already more loyal to their leaders than to the Senate wondered whether their loyalty would soon be tested. Was their commander named in the letter? Was he accused of plotting treason? If so, then every man under his command was implicated by association. The legions, restless and proud, waited for word, their discipline strained by the uncertainty. No soldier wished to be caught on the wrong side of history, yet choosing sides without clarity was as dangerous as marching blindly into battle. Amid this growing unease, certain figures seized the opportunity. Ambitious men claimed that they alone could interpret the letter's warnings, using it to rally allies and discredit enemies. Some whispered that the letter revealed a conspiracy of staggering scale, while others argued it was a forgery meant to frame innocent men. The truth mattered less than the political advantage it offered. Each faction twisted its meaning, each voice adding weight to the paranoia already hanging heavy over Rome. The letter, regardless of who wrote it, had accomplished its purpose. It had fractured unity and planted doubt where once there had been trust. In those weeks, Rome felt like a city besieged not by armies, but by suspicion. Senators plotted in shadows, generals measured their steps with caution, and citizens whispered anxiously in the streets. The hidden letter had become more powerful than any law, any decree, any public speech. It had transformed rumor into reality, and in doing so, it prepared the ground for actions that would soon tear the Republic apart. The warning carried in the letter did not remain confined to marble halls and whispered conversations. Its words began to move armies. Orders were dispatched with urgency, messengers riding hard across provinces to summon commanders and mobilize their legions. In the Roman world, military power was never far from politics, and now the Senate's suspicions spilled onto the battlefield. Generals who had once waited patiently for the Senate's decrees began to act with independence, shifting troops into position not only against external threats but against one another. A single letter had become the signal for the Republic's most dangerous possibility: Romans preparing to fight Romans. The legions themselves were restless. These were not abstract instruments of war, but men, farmers, craftsmen, and veterans hardened by years of campaigning, who carried loyalty less to the Senate and more to the commanders who paid them, fed them, and shared in their hardships. A general's bond with his troops was forged in mud, sweat, and blood. The Republic, distant and faceless, seemed less real than the figure who marched beside them, who offered spoils and honor in return for obedience. When whispers spread that some commanders might be branded traitors, soldiers felt the weight of those accusations as if they themselves were condemned. A soldier's fate was tied to the man he followed. If his commander was guilty, then loyalty could become a death sentence. Logistics began to shift in subtle but telling ways. Grain shipments were redirected to ensure the legions on the move had supplies. Blacksmiths in provincial towns were ordered to produce more weapons. Roads that had once carried trade now carried shields and spears, the steady march of boots echoing like thunder across the countryside. The presence of legions in places where none had been expected sent an unmistakable signal. Rome was no longer preparing for foreign conquest but for something far more dangerous: civil strife. For the commanders themselves, the letter's shadow loomed large. Each one had to make a choice: to prove his loyalty by obeying the Senate's directives, or to protect his own life and career by preparing for the possibility of betrayal. Even the most loyal among them could not ignore the fact that suspicion had already taken root. One general might see the movements of another not as obedience but as aggression. A single maneuver could be misread as the first step toward open rebellion. Trust, once fractured, was nearly impossible to restore. In campfires at night, soldiers whispered of coming conflict, asking who their true enemy was. Was it the barbarian across the frontier, or the fellow Roman who now stood accused of treason? Anxiety hung heavy in the air, for no one could predict whether tomorrow would bring orders to defend the Republic, or to march against former allies. The Republic's strength had always rested on the discipline of its legions, but now discipline was cracking under uncertainty. The letter, still hidden from most eyes, had already set the Republic's armies in motion. The question was no longer if blood would be spilled, but when, and by whose hand. The moment of confrontation arrived sooner than many had hoped and later than some had feared. Rome's legions, drawn into motion by suspicion and secrecy, finally collided on a battlefield that should never have existed. Two Roman armies faced each other across a plain, the banners of the Republic fluttering on both sides, each claiming to fight for the true salvation of Rome. Soldiers who had trained in the same drills, spoken the same oaths, and worshipped the same gods now stood prepared to cut each other down. The hidden letter had accomplished what foreign enemies could not. It had made Rome turn its sword inward. The clash began with uncertainty. Commanders studied one another's movements, wary of deception. Was that advance a genuine charge, or a feint to expose weakness? Trumpets blared, dust rose in thick clouds, and the disciplined formations of the Roman legions locked shields in brutal precision. The sound was deafening, iron striking iron, the thud of pillar-piercing shields, the cries of men thrown to the ground. On this day, strategy was poisoned by suspicion. Each general fought not only the enemy before him but the nagging fear that betrayal could come from within his own ranks. Every messenger was watched with doubt, every command questioned for its intent. The battle unfolded with calculated brutality. Cohorts surged forward in disciplined waves, clashing with a force that shook the earth. Cavalry darted along the flanks, their spears glinting under the sun as they sought to encircle the enemy. In the chaos, soldiers glimpsed familiar faces on the other side, neighbors, perhaps even distant kin, yet the demands of loyalty left no room for hesitation. The Republic's famed discipline held, but it was discipline born of fear as much as honor. For every man who struck down his foe, there lingered the haunting question of whether he had slain a traitor or a patriot. At the heart of the struggle, the commanders felt the weight of the letter more than the clash of swords. Their decisions were clouded by the knowledge that one false move could confirm suspicions and seal their doom. A retreat might be read as betrayal, an advance as reckless ambition. In such a climate, hesitation was fatal. Orders were given with urgency, not confidence, and the battlefield became a mirror of Rome's fractured soul. By the battle's end, the plain was littered with the dead, Roman blood soaking the earth. Victory belonged to one side, but it was hollow, tainted by the knowledge that it had been achieved against their own. What should have been a triumph felt instead like a wound, one that cut deeper than the battlefield itself. The hidden letter had brought victory to some and ruin to others, but for Rome, it had only planted the seeds of greater discord yet to come. The battlefield silence after the clash was heavy, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the cries of those searching for fallen comrades. Victory had been declared, but no one truly felt victorious. Among the survivors, the question lingered, what had they been fighting for? Rumors spread quickly through the camps and into the city, carried by messengers and deserters alike. The letter that had started the chain of events was now at the center of every whisper. Was it genuine, or had Rome been torn apart by a lie? The truth could no longer be ignored, and soon, in the dim chambers of the Senate, the betrayal was unmasked. The revelation came with a sting sharper than any sword. The letter, once guarded as a vital warning, was exposed as something far more sinister. Some claimed it had been forged to frame political enemies, its words deliberately twisted to inflame suspicion and draw armies into conflict. Others insisted it was authentic, but that its author had concealed their true identity, manipulating events to serve personal ambition. In either case, the damage was already done. Men who trusted its words had committed themselves to action, and the blood of thousands now stained their hands. For those who doubted the letter but remained silent, guilt festered. Rome had been deceived, and whether by accident or design, the city would never be the same. In the Senate, accusations flew like daggers. Senators shouted over one another, each desperate to prove their loyalty while discrediting rivals. Those who had benefited from the letter's existence defended its necessity, claiming it had revealed dangers that could not be ignored. Those who had suffered demanded retribution, calling for the punishment of forgers and conspirators alike. The atmosphere of mistrust, already thick, became suffocating. Men who once stood together now eyed one another as if every colleague might be the hidden author, every ally a secret traitor. For the generals, the fallout was devastating. Some returned to Rome hailed as saviors, only to find themselves quietly distrusted, their victories overshadowed by the suspicion that they had known more about the letter than they admitted. Others who lost were branded conspirators, their reputations shattered, their families disgraced. Soldiers, too, bore scars beyond the battlefield. They carried home not only physical wounds but the knowledge that they had killed fellow Romans because of words written in secret. Families mourned sons who had fallen in a conflict sparked not by necessity but by deception. The hidden letter had achieved more destruction than any invading army could have hoped for. Rome's unity had cracked, and though the Republic stood, it was weakened, fragile, and poisoned by paranoia. The question of who had written the letter, and why, would continue to haunt the city. It had sealed destinies, destroyed trust, and ensured that the Republic's path forward would be marked not by certainty, but by suspicion and fear. The dust of battle and the roar of accusation gradually settled, but the shadow of the letter lingered. Rome, outwardly triumphant and still clothed in its marble grandeur, bore invisible wounds. The Senate resumed its rituals, magistrates still carried out their duties, and the Forum bustled with traders and citizens as it always had. Yet beneath this surface, the city had changed. The letter had not only shaped the outcome of a single conflict but had shifted the course of the Republic itself. It proved that in a world of armies and steel, a fragile piece of parchment could wield equal or greater power. The knowledge was unsettling, for it revealed how easily Rome's destiny could be bent by words hidden in shadows. The consequences extended far beyond the battlefield. The trust between Senate and generals, between citizens and their leaders, had been fractured beyond repair. Every decision was now viewed with suspicion, every order second-guessed. The Republic, once bound by laws and tradition, now seemed bound by paranoia. Senators hesitated before forming alliances, fearing that loyalty would be betrayed. Generals looked warily over their shoulders, worried that their loyalty might be questioned at the next whisper of conspiracy. Even among the people, confidence eroded. If a single letter could drive Rome to war with itself, what certainty could there be in the promises of its rulers? In the years that followed, the lesson of the hidden letter echoed in ways both subtle and dramatic. Ambitious men remembered how effectively a piece of information, real or fabricated, could move armies and sway politics. They saw that it was not always strength in the field that determined victory, but control of perception, rumor, and fear. From then on, letters, decrees, and secret communications became weapons as potent as swords. The Republic's enemies did not need to storm its gates when they could destabilize it from within. The precedent had been set. Rome could be undone not only by force, but by whispers. For ordinary Romans, the legacy of the letter was harder to articulate but deeply felt. Families who had lost sons and fathers in the conflict mourned with bitterness, knowing that their loved ones had died not against foreign invaders but against their own countrymen. Veterans spoke of a war that felt wrong, a war where loyalty was punished and obedience led only to regret. These stories circulated quietly, reinforcing the sense that Rome's greatness was increasingly tainted by betrayal and mistrust. Looking back, historians would debate whether the letter was genuine or forged, whether it saved the Republic from a true conspiracy or doomed it by creating one. But what cannot be denied is its lasting influence. It stands as a reminder of the fragility of power and the vulnerability of even the greatest empires to deception. Rome, with all its armies, wealth, and monuments, could be shaken by a single piece of writing. That is perhaps the most haunting truth of all, that the fate of civilizations can turn not on the clash of armies or the rise of emperors, but on words carried in secret, read in fear, and believed in haste. Even today, the story echoes as a warning. Information, once released, cannot be controlled. It spreads, it mutates, and it shapes actions that cannot be undone. For Rome, the hidden letter marked the beginning of deeper fractures that would one day break the Republic entirely. And for us, it stands as an eternal lesson that empires are not only built or destroyed by the sword, but by the fragile power of the written word.